Hi there. My name is Dr. R.A. Tuckman. I'm a psychologist and ADHD expert, and I'm here to talk to you today about basically what makes ADHD ADHD. In other words, why do folks with ADHD have certain kinds of difficulties, but perhaps not others? And most importantly, like, what do we do about it? How do we help folks with ADHD do better in life, whether it's you yourself with ADHD, a romantic partner, a child, a friend, whatever, right? So I've written 4 books on ADHD. I've done almost 500 presentations. This, I think, is my most important contribution to the field, this stuff that we're going to be talking about here today. And what it reflects is 20 years of specializing in folks with ADHD. So, back in the beginning, I sort of understood ADHD as basically like, the list of symptoms that was in the diagnostic manual. If you have 6 out of these 9 and 6 out of those 9, then that means you have ADHD. And I just sort of memorized the list. Over the years, then, I kind of came to my second understanding of ADHD, and that was ADHD is really about executive functions, which is probably a term you've at least heard in passing. This presentation now is my third understanding of ADHD. This is my third kind of like fundamental shift in how I conceptualize ADHD and how I work with clients in making their lives better. And this third shift then really is about how ADHD impacts somebody's ability to see time and feel the future. And this is going to make a lot more sense. We're going to talk about a bit of theory, but really this is oriented towards what do you do tonight? What do you do tomorrow? What do you do next week? So this is really about kind of making people's lives better. So we're going to talk generally about time and time management, and then we're going to come specifically down to how folks with ADHD might struggle with these. So in general, time management, simple definition, involves planning and then completing tasks in relation to time, right? So it's all about in relation to time. So in order to do that then at any kind of effective level, you have to have the ability to both see time, in other words, kind of be aware of the passage of time, what time is it now, what's coming next, but also you have to be able to feel the future. And this is kind of where motivation comes in. So it's not just knowing, it's doing. And if you can understand how these pieces fit together and how ADHD specifically impacts the ability to see time and feel the future, you're going to be in a much, much better position to manage ADHD, whether it's your own or someone you care about, or if you're a clinician or a coach, the clients that you work with. So, we all struggle with time management. Time is always a challenge for all of us. So I have a saying that folks with ADHD don't invent new problems. It just exacerbates the universal ones, right? So we all struggle with time management to some greater or lesser degree. The difference is our friends with ADHD struggle a little bit more. And we're going to talk about the general, the sort of universal, and then we're going to talk specifically about the ADHD spin on that. So in general, like when we talk about the sense of time, it is one of the executive functions. There's, a bunch of different executive functions. Different authors kind of slice and dice them a little bit differently, but I think pretty much everybody agrees the ability to be aware of time, to sense time, is one of the executive functions, and it's certainly an important ability. So to manage time then, it's not simply, here's my plan, let's go, but it's also, here's my plan, something else came up, or that didn't go according to plan, now what, right? So it's this kind of fluidly shifting allocation of the time that I have available between the various tasks I'd like to complete, or the goals or the priorities of what I'm trying to do here in this moment. To be successful in life, in any kind of, standard way, requires some good time management, whether you're 10 years old or 30 years old. Obviously, our expectations are different for 10 and 30-year-olds, but still, at some level, you have to be able to manage time in some age-appropriate kind of a way. Now, the thing is, for some people, they have like a really clear sense of time, like that internal clock, so to speak, ticks pretty loud. So they're very aware of like, what time is it now? How long have I been doing this? When do I need to transition to that next thing? Whereas then there are other people whose internal clock just ticks really soft, like they've kind of no sense of the passage of time. It's really sort of like, if it was fun, time flies. If it's boring, time creeps. And man, is there a difference between those two. Now, the good news, though, is whatever your internal sense of time is, we can still supplement internal abilities with lots of external systems, tools, and strategies. So in other words, all that good ADHD time management stuff, much of which is just generally good time management stuff, is going to be especially effective and especially important for the folks whose internal clock just doesn't tick that loud. So when we talk about time management, we talk about it as if it's like one thing, but when you get down to it, time management is a lot of things, right? There's a bunch of kind of like sub-abilities, as we might call them, involved sort of under this umbrella of time management. So things like setting priorities among competing options. Really need to do this, but then again, I should also do that. And oh yeah, I got that other thing due in a week. Do I work on that? Do I work on this? What should I be doing now? So that ability to kind of make choices and sequence things. Predicting how long an activity is going to take. And folks with ADHD in particular, we all tend to underestimate everybody. Folks with ADHD are especially prone to what's called best case scenario planning, where they really underestimate how long things take. The ability to sequence various activities, which I kind of mentioned a moment ago a little bit incorrectly. In other words, I got to do this and this and this, except I got to call the plumber, but they're only available until 5, but it's 4 now. Really, this other thing is more important, but that I can do after 5. So do I do this now? Do I do that? Right. So like all of that sort of planning, because if you don't remember or get around to calling the plumber till 8 at night, it doesn't do you a lot of good. We also need to be able to monitor the passage of time while we're doing something. And folks with ADHD tend to get stuck in hyperfocus, and they don't notice how long they've been doing the thing that they're doing, which then spills into whatever, at least in theory, should have come next. Sometimes we need to notice the approach, but then the arrival of a specific time. Ooh, I got to get on that call at 3. What time is it now? And then, of course, we need to readjust and shuffle things around as circumstances change. In other words, spend too long on that, now what? Or I thought I just needed to do this, now, turns out we also need to do that. So that ability to shift things around, to kind of pause, re-examine, reset, and figure out what it is that you're going to do. So these are just some. This is not a definitive list, but just an example that when we talk about time management, we're talking about actually a bunch of different abilities that all sort of wrap into one. But the thing of it is, to manage time well requires managing attention well. That, in other words, we've all had those moments when, like best laid plans of mice and men kind of thing, great plan, whoops, what happened? Went somewhere else. So like those moments when we get distracted, those good intentions, they kind of disappear. If, as I say, kind of your attention gets hijacked by something more interesting, then those good intentions go out the window, and what you thought you were going to do with a chunk of time turns out to be something else that winds up getting done. On the flip side of distraction is hyperfocus. Now, hyperfocus looks like really good attention, and sort of, kind of, maybe it is, but really what hyperfocus is, it's a loss of awareness of time passing. So, we all have some moments of hyperfocus, perhaps. Folks with ADHD have much more moments of hyperfocus where they lock in and they lose track of what else it is that's coming next. So they spend too long on the task at hand. One of the ways of sort of thinking about this is that they kind of get distracted by the current task, and then they forget the rest of what they need to do. So again, it looks like awesome attention, but it's really just the flip side of the coin of distraction. So distraction is when our attention shifts, when ideally it should have stuck. Hyperfocus is when our attention sticks, when ideally it should have shifted. And just to throw another executive function into the mix here, working memory is that sub-ability of memory in general that helps us hold a current task in our attention. This is what I'm doing now. Nope, not that. Nope, not that. This is a thing I'm doing. A to B to C to D, done, right? So attention and working memory work closely together. And folks with ADHD will often have a plan in mind. They're halfway through, and then some other thing kind of pulls them off task. Again, like their attention gets hijacked by some other external stimulus or by some other sort of passing thought that they have inside their own head. But time management then, we manage time in the moment, but really time management is about the future. It's about goals for the future, benefit for ourselves or people we care about in the future. So if it's something super easy, you get a text from your spouse, what time are you going to be home? 6, send, right? No time management needed on a 3-second task. You just do it and it's done. But of course, 0.1% of things we do take 3 seconds, right? Most of what we do involves some greater length of time where we need to juggle competing goals and figure out what is the best thing to do. So if all you do is react to whatever comes at you, you're not really managing time. You're just reacting. And just reacting will probably not give you a rich and fulfilling life. The challenge then is, how do I figure out what to react to? All sorts of stuff coming at me. What do I do first? What do I do second? What do I do last? And what do I frankly never do? Like, that's an interesting email, but you know what? The day will never come where I address it. I'm going to let that go. Or here's a fun project. That would be kind of cool, but you know what? Nope, not going to do it. Or there's an interesting article. You know what? I can tell now I'm never going to get there. The day will not come that I have the time where that article makes the cut to read. So I'm just going to, close the tab or chuck it in the recycling and be done with it. And the reason for that is that just because something is interesting in the moment doesn't mean that it's worthwhile in the long run, or that it kind of makes the cut relative to what else it is that we potentially could be doing. But in order to sort of figure out, is this worth doing? Is it not worth doing? And if it is worth doing, when should I do it? Involves not simply saying that's interesting or not interesting, but we have to sort of pause for a moment. We have to stop and say, that looks interesting, but is that the thing I'm doing? Or are there other things? Let me think for a moment. What else could I be doing? And then let me make a real choice. This is where Russell Barkley's response inhibition theory of ADHD comes in. That his theory says that the fundamental deficit, the thing that makes ADHD ADHD, is that it impacts the ability to sort of pause, to stop, to not simply respond to whatever that passing distraction or passing thought is, and instead to then allow the executive functions to kind of do their thing, right? So it's in that space between stimulus and response that the executive functions operate. So according to Barkley, and a lot of what we're going to talk about here today is very much built on what he's done. It's built on his response inhibition theory. It's really about that ability to pause and not simply respond, or react to whatever it is that kind of passes by. So this is where it gets kind of a little weirdly philosophical, and I'm only going to have one slide of philosophy here. So, but at the end of the day, time management involves internal or personal control over our behavior, as opposed to external or environmental control over behavior. So in other words, do I choose what I do, or am I a slave to whatever it is that's going on around me? So if I walk into a bakery just to get a cup of coffee, can I resist the pull of those delicious chocolate chip cookies that I see in the window, right? So am I choosing, or are the cookies choosing for me? or that text I got, and now I'm off on a, tear on some link to another, to another, to another, right? Am I choosing, or is the text choosing for me? So when we're hijacked by distractions, when we feel pulled down a path of action that isn't necessarily what we would have chosen, right? It does then raise the question, am I losing free will in those moments? So do I manage time so that I can exert my free will and pursue the goals that are important to me? Or do I use free will so that I can manage time, right? It gets a little bit kind of entangled, I think. But it then also raises the question, does ADHD decrease free will? That, I often say that ADHD is a disorder of actualizing good intentions, right? Folks with ADHD, lots of good intentions. The trouble is in the making it happen. That then raises a question. If you take medication for your ADHD and it makes you more planful, more consistent, as I sometimes say, if it closes a gap between intentions and actions, does that mean then that ADHD medication actually increases free will? I think the answer is yeah, I think it kind of does. Now, I only took one semester of philosophy many, many moons ago, so I'm certainly not prepared to answer the deeper philosophical questions of this, but I think it does raise some really interesting questions. And I think that, there's something in there to be thinking about. This then brings us to our first big concept, first of two. So the concept is called time horizon. And the basic idea here is, how close in time does something need to be for someone to be motivated into action? So in other words, if you're a student, a paper, if you're an adult, a report for work due on Friday, and it's now Monday, how much do you feel that? Like, how much do you see that deadline and feel some sense of like, I should probably do something about it? How much does that deadline figure into your planning on Monday? There are some folks who feel highly motivated and they really see it, and man, do they get going on it first thing. As soon as they get the assignment or as soon as they know that report needs to be done, they are on it. Then there are other people who it just doesn't figure into their planning until they get a whole lot closer to Friday. Now, granted, the more interesting something is, probably it hits your radar a whole lot earlier. By contrast, if it's really, boring, if it's not interesting, if it's kind of annoying and hard and just painful, probably it figures a little bit less in terms of how you what you think about managing when it comes to managing your schedule. Now, the thing about time horizon is, if your boss gets on your case on Tuesday about that report and says, look, man, you better have this done and it better be good because, we know what happened the last 3 weeks, right? In that case, you might be much more inclined to start chipping away on it on Tuesday. Or if you're the parent of a kid or a teenager who kind of harasses them about getting their homework done and starting that paper on Tuesday, they might get going. But in that case, it's not really on the person's radar so much as somebody else is cramming it onto their radar, right? So the fundamental thing of like, does this person really see this Friday deadline on Monday? The answer is still, not really. But it does sort of bring us to an idea that a lot of managing ADHD is going to be about managing external things more so than changing internal things. So tuck that idea away. We'll come back to it. So again, according to Barkley, ADHD causes future myopia. So myopia, the ability to see clearly. And that they don't see the future as clearly. And it's kind of led to this line. It's a bit of a joke. It's certainly an oversimplification, but I think it kind of carries a truth that for folks with ADHD, there's basically 2 times. There's now, and then there's not now. And basically everything that isn't now is not now. And not now means later today, next week, next year, 50 years from now, like all the not now all kind of blends together. And if it's not a thing I'm doing right now, then it all blends into not now. Again, obviously that's an oversimplification. Certainly Barkley doesn't, imply that it's as black and white as that, but it's an interesting idea. And I think it's a helpful idea to kind of think about. And the reason then that folks with ADHD don't feel the future, they don't see the future as clearly, is because they have a much shorter time horizon for their age. So a 10-year-old with ADHD compared to a 10-year-old without ADHD is not going to get going on stuff until a whole lot closer to the deadline. Or a 20-year-old. Now, once you hit about 30 or your mid to late 20s, it catches up a little bit more. But for folks with ADHD, it's hard to plan into the future when you don't even see those future deadlines. Like they don't hit their radar until they're a whole lot closer. It's not that they're unaware of it, but it's this kind of vague thing like somewhere out there, which is why then folks with ADHD tend to be such big procrastinators, and not in that kind of anxious, neurotic they're not the people who on Monday are fretting over it but not doing anything, Tuesday angsting over it, Wednesday like in a panic, and then Thursday finally, they kind of get over the hump and they get going on it. For folks with ADHD, it's more kind of apathy. So Monday, like, whatever, I got plenty of time. Tuesday, oh yeah, don't I have that thing on Friday? All right, well, I got some other stuff to do right now. Wednesday, I guess maybe I'll sort of sit down, and they'll kind of tinker around the edges, but they're not bringing like their best, hardest effort on Wednesday, even if somebody makes them. And then Thursday, like, bam, now all of a sudden we feel it. Or maybe Friday morning, bam, now we feel it. So the anxiety that some people feel about procrastination is usually not as present in the person with ADHD. Although I have a joke that ADHD can definitely co-occur or lead to anxiety, but it's not necessarily in the person with ADHD, right? So it's the parent, it's this romantic partner, it's the coworker, the boss, like it's other people who feel anxious, like, you haven't gotten started on that yet? Really? Seriously? Like you're not working on that yet? So it's kind of like apathy, bam, here we go. So that I work best under pressure sometimes means I only work under pressure, or I only do my best work under pressure. And it's because before that heat of the moment, their brain doesn't kind of like activate to really be able to bring in their attention, focus in, and get the job done. The challenge then for us is we don't usually have like one deadline and that's it, right? We have lots of different deadlines, lots of different goals, lots of different things that are interesting / important that we could be or should be working on. So some of these are fun and they don't take a lot of effort to make ourselves do. And then some of them are kind of boring, annoying, painful, but still really important. So things like, I should really sort through my papers for taxes, or I should probably eat more kale, or I should, wake up a little early and then work out before I go to work, right? So stuff that's not necessarily great in the present moment, but is very much about maximizing the future. So in the future, I will be better off if I suffer a little bit right now in the present. It's the executive functions then that help us sort through all that. Do I do the fun stuff that's easy, or do I do the harder stuff that's definitely not as fun, but is better for me later, right? And we kind of sort through what it is that we're going to do. And of course, what you do in this one moment now might depend on what you did before this, and might also depend on what you're able to do after this, right? So it's not just about the present moment. It's thinking about the past, it's thinking about the future, and how all of this connects together. So on the one hand, you would think that sounds pretty simple. You just kind of, you rank order everything and you just work your way down the list. But this brings us to our second big concept and the reason is that whether something really feels worth it or doesn't, is influenced by time horizon. So the further out something is, the less that we feel it. And this is then big concept number 2, temporal discounting, meaning the further out in time a reward or punishment is, the less that we feel it now. Then in other words, we feel the present much more strongly than the future. And I think a great example of this is I could take $50 and go out to dinner tonight and have a great dinner and enjoy myself and it's going to be fun. Or I can take that $50 and I can put it into my retirement. And a few decades from now, when I retire, that $50 could be worth 200, 400, 500, I don't know, like way more than $50. So mathematically speaking, it is definitely better to make $50 into 200 than it is to spend $50 now. I can do 4 dinners at retirement, or I can do 1 dinner now. Mathematically speaking, that is stone simple, right? Piece of cake. The problem is, generally speaking, people kind of suck at saving for retirement. And the reason is dinner right now feels way better than some vague notion of dinner 30 years from now. Or to put it another way, the siren song of the present tempts us to maximize right now at the cost of what's going to come later, right? So we maximize the present and ignore the cost in the future. Anybody who's taken Psych 101 or possibly wandered around YouTube too much has probably seen like what's called the marshmallow experiment, where you take a bunch of cute like 3 to 5-year-olds and you say, I will give you 1 marshmallow right now. You can definitely eat it if you want. Or if you can wait a minute and not eat it, I'm going to go down the hall and I'm going to get another marshmallow. So if you can wait, you're going to get 2, or right now you can eat 1. Again, mathematically, super easy, right? 2 is definitely more than 1, right? And 2 marshmallows is definitely way more delicious, twice as delicious as 1 marshmallow. But just like with dinner, the 1 dinner versus the 4 dinners, right? The math is the opposite of what often people tend to do. And this is all people. We all feel the future a whole lot less than we feel this moment right now. For folks with ADHD, though, again, ADHD doesn't invent new problems. It just exacerbates the universal ones, right? So because folks with ADHD have a shorter time horizon and therefore do more temporal discounting, they tend to choose options that have immediate payoffs rather than long-term ones. So screwing around on Twitter, hardly useful in any kind of way beyond the present moment, but it's definitely more interesting, perhaps, than working on your math homework or, cleaning up the kitchen or getting going on that like complicated, quote that you need to do for work or whatever. Because folks with ADHD really feel the present, like they really feel the present much more so than they feel the future. And because they really feel the present, it's an unfair fight. Like it's so much easier to pick the thing that's going to be best right now and sort of take a pass on what's going to be most important for them later, until all of a sudden, somehow Monday becomes Thursday night. And it's again that like, oh my God, how did that happen? And the fact that it's happened 50 Mondays in a row doesn't necessarily change how they feel on this Monday. And that's one of the things that's kind of confusing and frustrating, not only for the person with ADHD, but the people who care about them, is that the same mistakes keep being made. So it can look like bad judgment. Like if you are the non-ADHD person here, it's easy to say like, come on, man, why do you keep doing that? Like, it's going to work. If I sat down and said, hypothetically, you have something due on Friday, it's now Monday, what's your best plan of action? They can probably tell you should probably chip away Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then finish it up Thursday. Bam, no fuss, no muss, everybody's happy, right? Like the knowing is the easy part, but somewhere on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday, just not much gets done. And then once again, here we go, Groundhog Day, back to Thursday. So they're reasonable decisions if you can take into account time horizon and temporal discounting. they're just unfortunately ill-fated and repetitive. In that just as past experience doesn't change how they feel, guilt-inducing lectures don't really change what they do either. And, you know, the sort of, I don't know, a little bit of a joke with perhaps the seed of truth that I have here is that mostly what guilt-inducing lectures do is they possibly make somebody feel bad about themselves, probably also make them feel bad about the person who's giving the lecture, right? Like, doesn't really work. Nobody's winning. Definitely nobody's enjoying it. So if ADHD was just about cranking up the guilt, we wouldn't have ADHD, right? It would be something else. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't all do our best. I'm not saying that we can't hold each other accountable, but my hope is that this presentation is going to help you use strategies that are actually much more effective and that make people feel better about themselves rather than worse. And certainly feeling effective is a pretty good reason to feel good about yourself. So this then kind of brings us to the idea that we can almost say that ADHD equals too much present and not enough future, right? That folks with ADHD, again, are more likely to maximize the present moment at the cost of doing the things that will serve them better in the future. And the reason is we need to disengage from the present moment in order to kind of like consider the possibilities, to see what else is going on. What else can I do? What else do I need to do? How does this all rank relative to everything else? This is, again, Berkeley's response inhibition theory of ADHD. Which brings us then to sort of a saying, I keep citing Berkeley here because he's really the man when it comes to talking about ADHD, that this is kind of a famous saying he has, that ADHD is not a disorder of knowing what to do. It's a disorder of doing what you know. So somewhere between here and there, the knowing doesn't convert reliably enough into the doing. And the add-on that I have to this famous little chestnut is, in fact, folks with ADHD know far better what to do because they've been told far more often what they should be doing, right? So ADHD is not a deficit of knowledge. It's not a deficit of having good intentions. It's a deficit of converting those intentions reliably, consistently into actions. So what do we do about it? Well, let's start by helping folks with ADHD see time by externalizing it. So again, if your internal clock doesn't tick loud enough, that's fine. We got plenty of external clocks. So we're going to talk about how to see time by externalizing it. And then in the end, we're going to talk about how to feel the future by increasing motivation. So it's the awareness, and then it's the drive to do something with it. If you remember, I said, time management begins with temptation management or attention management. Let's start there. So again, best laid plans kind of thing. We got to manage our attention well. So certainly medication for ADHD is pretty helpful in that regard. But also you want to create a good work environment, whatever it is that means to you. Like whatever it is that's going to help you be less distracted, more on point, kind of that signal to noise ratio, stronger signal, meaning the stuff you should be paying attention to, weaker noise, meaning the stuff that's probably interesting but not useful. Preemptively eliminate those distractions. Don't rely on your brain, on your attention control to say, nah, that's not the thing. So if you're getting 50 alerts on your phone for all sorts of like stupid apps that are trying to get you to pay attention to them, even though they don't really deserve that much of your attention, turn all that stuff off. Get rid of other distractions, use noise canceling headphones, put on a white noise machine to block out other noise. Go somewhere where there just isn't as much fun stuff that you can do. You're much more likely to stay on track if you manage distractions externally than if you rely on internal control. And the problem is every time some other external thing pings your attention, right, it takes a little bit of effort, a little bit of willpower to say, nope, not that. Back to here. This is what I'm doing. And if that happens often enough, it burns up your willpower. And at a certain point, you're going to go with that distraction. Now, granted, we can't eliminate distractions inside our brain because we all have random thoughts and ideas. But if you can eliminate the external ones, at least you're halfway there. Like that is a thing that you can do something about. And obviously, medication helps with the internal distractions. So this then brings us to what do we actually do about time? And when I was writing my third book, Understand Your Brain, Get More Done, the ADHD Executive Functions Workbook, I was looking at each of the executive functions, and then I was thinking about like, okay, so what are good strategies for improving the sense of time or managing life better with a bit of a weak sense of time? And, there's all these ADHD friendly strategies out there, and there's lots of good ideas. But as I looked at them, it hit me that, what? These are all like variations on a few basic ideas, which I think is really helpful to know, because instead of memorizing 100 strategies and figuring out which is the right one to apply to this situation, if you got a few major concepts, you can then kind of go from there, including creating your own strategies of what's going to be most helpful. So I'll run through them quick and then we'll give some examples. So first of all, supplement your internal sense of time with plenty of clocks and external reminders. In other words, don't hold it in your head. It's out there. Use that instead. Second key concept, use alarms and other limits to notify you that a specific time has arrived. So again, folks with ADHD in particular, but also everybody, tend to get stuck in whatever we're doing, and it's hard to notice like, oh, wait, it's time to go. So this is one of the reasons why folks with ADHD often run late so much. They don't notice like, whoops, time to go. Number 3, and we'll talk a bit extra about this, is use a schedule to plan out your time, right? Because time management is tasks in relation to time. You need to have both, right? So I know schedules are a bit of a, love-hate, a bit of a double-edged sword for folks with ADHD, but they really are kind of important. So we're going to talk about how to make it actually work in a way that that's effective and that you can feel okay about. So some ideas in terms of, supplementing that internal sense of time with plenty of external clocks and reminders. First of all, this is kind of like dumb obvious, but I kind of need to say it anyway. Put up a bunch of clocks. Like, it's hard to know what time it is if you can't see a clock. And I don't mean pull out your phone, swipe the thing, type in your key thing and then see what time it is. I mean, like, flick your eyes up, bam, there's the time. When it comes to clocks, not all clocks are created equal. The problem with digital clocks, meaning like the clocks that most of us tend to have, not the old-fashioned kind with hands, digital clocks are really abstract, right? In the sense that there are these random lines that sort of change every second or every minute, but like a 6 isn't physically any different than a 5, let's say, right? I mean, it's physically different, but it doesn't sort of tell us anything about what 5 means versus what 6 means. By contrast, those old-fashioned clocks with hands, you actually see the hand moving. Like, it is a much more tangible indicator of how much time has passed or how much time until that time comes that we need to do the next thing, right? So as you see that sweep of the hand, you see the progression of time flowing past. So I think analog clocks are really much more helpful. And I would encourage you to get a lot of analog clocks rather than digital, or even on your devices, if you can, like on your screensaver or whatever, to switch stuff to the analog version, not the digital version. Of course, just seeing the time, if all you do is see it with your eyeballs, but your brain doesn't really process it, not actually that helpful, right? So not only do you want a habit to check the time, but then to actually think about what it means. It is now 4:17. Where am I at? What do I got to do? What's coming next? Am I sort of where I should be? Right? So to take that moment along the way, occasionally through the day, just kind of think about it. I think it's helpful also, there's various kind of internet blockers or internet monitors. So there's a device called Circle. There's other ones that can be really helpful to actually like see where your time goes. And you may be shocked and frankly, slightly appalled to see how much of your time goes to certain places. So as a way to kind of monitor and get an idea, and then from there to make some adjustments. Obviously, these three ideas are not like the sum total of all ideas related to, putting up clocks, but hopefully more of a representative sample, and you can then create your own ideas for, putting up clocks as a way to monitor the passage of time. Some representative examples then of alarms or other limits to notify you that a particular time has arrived. The thing about this is it's got to happen at the point of performance. So in other words, to send yourself, for example, leave yourself a voicemail at work or send yourself an email from home to your work email address to say this is the thing that needs to happen, right? So you don't have to carry it in your mind from home to work, but rather you see it at that time and place. For folks who are really good at ignoring beeping alarms, put your lights or your TV, your computer, your browser, whatever, on a shut-off timer. So long ago, when I used to run an adult ADHD support group in Northern Virginia, we had a guy in the group who gave this really awesome example where he said, yeah, I used to get caught up at night kind of screwing around on my computer, and then I get to bed too late. So I put the lights on a timer, which is a really awesome idea because it's really hard to not notice that all of a sudden the room has gone black. Problem is, then he says, yeah, I know, but unfortunately, I got really good at working in the dark. Bam. All right. So half a solution, right? Being aware of it doesn't mean doing it. But if you're not aware, that is the end of the story right there. So making sure that whatever alarms and limits you use are noticeable, that they really break your attention and make you aware it is now this time, so that then you have the possibility to maybe make a different choice. Now, the flip side of this, perhaps, is to avoid those really engrossing, interesting, high stim, hard to walk away from it kinds of activities when you need to transition. So in other words, prevent hyperfocus. So when I'm talking to parents or kids about like what to do during, breaks between homework or whatever, getting onto a really fun video game that, let's be honest, you will never do 5 minutes and walk away, probably not a good idea. Probably the thing to do when you've got 10 minutes is not a thing that you're going to want to do for an hour, right? Another idea, pegging your schedule to somebody else's. So in other words, tell your coworker, hey, do me a favor, when you're leaving for that meeting at 2, like just swing by my desk and just kind of grab me on your way out. I don't want to get caught up in other things. So like if you could do that, that'd be awesome. It's a pretty small ask. And if you make up the favor in other ways, it works out well and they're not going to resent doing it. And if they are too resentful about doing it, I think you may want to kind of rethink how much you want to have this person in your life. But that's a discussion for another presentation, perhaps. Another idea, especially because folks with ADHD often struggle with getting to bed on time, set a bedtime alarm. That it's easy to set an alarm, perhaps, to wake you up in the morning. Whether it works or not, it's a different discussion. But certainly, if you set an alarm that says it is now time to get into bed, or if you live with somebody else, to say, hey, when you go to bed, drag me with you, makes it more likely that you're actually going to get into bed on time, which, by the way, also makes it more likely that you're going to get out of bed on time. A lot of morning problems are night problems. If you get to bed too late, you're not waking up on time, at least not easily, and you're definitely not bringing your best to the rest of the day's challenges. Finally, use a schedule to plan out your time. So writing out a daily schedule. In other words, what's my plan for today? So first thing in the morning, or possibly last thing last night, just write it out. Like, what's my deal? What do I need to do? When is it going to happen? Because folks in general, folks with ADHD in particular, tend to underestimate, add a little bit. Like, always add a little bit more. And not just for the task itself, but also scribble in a little bit of extra time to get ready, to get dressed, to gather your things, or transition from one to the next, maybe to clean up what you were just doing, maybe some travel time. Like, that stuff counts too, unless you're transporting from one place to another, or it's just drop one thing and grab something else. You got to add in a little bit of extra time there so that you're not constantly running a little bit late or a lot late through your whole day. And then definitely as things change, whoops, that took longer than I thought, or uh-oh, this new thing popped up. Look at your schedule, shuffle things around. Maybe actually, if you have a lot of random things that pop up in a day, don't schedule things too tight. Assume there's going to be extra things added in. So pad in plenty of extra open time so that those new things have somewhere to go. Also, breaking up big chunks of time. The bigger the chunk of time is, the easier it is to get lost in it. So the example that I give here is for your morning routine. If you wake up at 7, you got to be out the door at 8. So let's see, to make that happen, I need to be, and maybe you plan time backwards. So to get out by 8, I need to be sitting down to eat breakfast by 7:50. To be sitting down at 7:50, I got to be done making it, or I got to be in the kitchen by 7:40. To be in the kitchen by 7:40, I need to be out of the bathroom, right? So that means I got to get into the bathroom by 7:20. So to be in the bathroom by 7:20, like ding, 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 right? Work it backwards. That way, when you look at the clock and you're in the bathroom and it's 7:23, like, whoops, crap, I'm a few minutes behind, better hustle. Or if you look at the clock and it's 7:17, you're a few minutes ahead. All right, cool. Yeah, I'm in good shape here, right? That way you only need to manage smaller bits of time as opposed to kind of wandering through this big chunk of time and not really having a clear sense of where it is that you should be. So since we had talked before, time management is tasks in relation to time. To actually use a schedule well, to actually be on time and getting done what you need to get done, first thing is you need to know what time it is. And then the second thing is you need to know what it is you're actually supposed to be doing right now. Because otherwise, it's hard to know what the thing to do is or what the time is that you should be doing it. I know, again, folks with ADHD often have kind of a love-hate relationship, maybe more hate than love, when it comes to some sort of a schedule system. It's not a moral thing. It's not a, I'm better than you thing. It's not a whatever thing. It's just sort of like, if you want your life to be a bit less chaotic, a bit less stressful, a good schedule system is probably going to be helpful in that regard. Doesn't need to be crazy, over the top, whatever, but some sort of a schedule system is probably going to make your life better than not having a schedule system. The problem, though, is if you've had a lot of bad experiences with schedule systems, it's easy to be pessimistic about it working out again. And you know what? It's not completely unreasonable. Like, if history says this tends not to work out, at what point does optimistic become delusional? And you're like, dude, why should I expect it? Never worked before. What's magical about this time? Or alternatively, folks with ADHD or some other folks for other reasons don't like using a schedule because they don't want to say something like, work on quarterly sales report Tuesday from 2 to 4. If Tuesday at 2 comes, you're like, ugh, I don't feel like doing that. That's not the thing I want to be doing now. So there's this sense of like being locked in. And I get that, right? Because I understand that, Tuesday at 2, you may not feel like doing it, but maybe it's the thing to do anyway. And we'll talk in the feeling the future. We'll talk about how to be a bit more willing to do it. But in terms of the first part, that sort of pessimism about it working out well, the thing about a good schedule system, or even not just a reasonable, not even like an amazing, just like a reasonably decent enough schedule system, is the more you use it, the better it works. And that even using it some of the time, but not others, is still better than not using it at all. So even if you only use your schedule half the time or a quarter of the time, it's still better. Your life will be happier than if you don't use it at all. And the thing about the schedule is it's a means to an end. It's about helping you create the life for yourself to achieve the goals that you're interested in. That's why people have a schedule, is it makes their life better, not to please other people who are nagging you about why you don't have a schedule. So we're talking about schedules, but let's talk about to-do lists as well, because these, that's probably the other thing people are nagging you about. You should have a to-do list. Um, Schedules then are good and to-do lists are good, but they're not the same thing, right? Schedules are for what I call time-specific tasks. I got that call on Monday at 3. I've got a dentist appointment, Thursday at 1. Got to pick up my kids from soccer, Thursday at 7, whatever, right? So like specific events at specific times. Now, by contrast, to-do lists are for time non-specific tasks. So in other words, got to call Roberto back. Could be now, could be in an hour, could be tomorrow, possibly it could be next week. Depends. I don't know how urgent it is. There might be a deadline. Got to call him before Friday at 5, but maybe there isn't. But regardless, even if there is a deadline, it's time non-specific. I got a lot of options about when to do it. And that's kind of a blessing and a curse. It's a bit of a double-edged sword. Unfortunately, to be successful in life, you really kind of need both. I know like you don't need more things to do, but like seriously, a schedule is good, but it's not a to-do list, and a to-do list isn't a schedule. By the same token, a hammer isn't a drill and a drill isn't a hammer. Like they're both important. They're both great. They're definitely not interchangeable. Folks who say, oh, I can just remember everything, I don't need to write it down, right? When somebody in my office says that, first of all, they're usually like a 15-year-old boy with ADHD. But when I hear that in my office, my thought is not, oh my God, I cannot believe what an amazing memory this person has, right? Like that's usually not the thought that first crosses my mind when someone tells me they can remember everything. Probably what it means is I don't feel like dealing with a schedule because I hate them, or I'm not actually that motivated to remember the things that other people want me to remember. But nonetheless, it probably means that their life is a whole lot more chaotic and there's a lot more stress in it, probably for them, probably also for the people around them. And, the line that I trot out at this time is if you can remember everything you have going on, then you don't have enough going on. Like, and maybe this is just me, but like, you don't want a life that's so simple that you can hold in mind every single thing that you need to do. Like, you want a life that's sort of rich enough and complex enough that you need to write at least a few things down. So when it comes to having a good schedule, then, some people have paper schedule books. I do. I kind of like having a big schedule where I can see a whole week really big and I can see who I'm seeing when. So as far as I'm concerned, paper schedule is still great for the people they're great for. But for a lot of folks, actually, some sort of electronic schedule is really a much better option. Especially when you can sync it with other people. So like shared calendars. So family members can put stuff on the calendar or move stuff around or whatever. So you don't have that thing. No, I told you that the kids had a dentist appointment on Thursday. And then you say, no, you didn't. I definitely don't remember you saying that. And they say, no, I definitely did. You were drinking coffee. You're wearing a red shirt. The kids were watching TV. This is what happened. Your Honor, I'd like to submit for evidence the fact that here's a dirty coffee mug, right? So like, if you can just stick it onto the schedule, then nothing needs to be remembered and everybody's life probably gets a little bit easier. If you're someone who doesn't have a ton of scheduled things, then you're probably much better served by not having a paper schedule book, even though I love mine, and instead having some sort of online calendar that will, beep at you when you're on your computer or your tablet or your phone or whatever. So that way you don't have to hold in mind 3 days from now, I have my first, scheduled meeting. 2 days from now, 1 day from now, 6 hours from now, 3 hours from now, 20 minutes from now. Oh my God, I missed it, right? Like it does the reminding for you so you don't have to do the remembering inside your head. Some people, though, benefit from a little bit of a hybrid system, meaning a paper calendar or whatever, but setting some electronic alarms. I never recommend having 2 calendars because that's a total setup for forgetting in one place. But having a paper calendar that you sometimes set alarms for, that actually can work pretty well for the folks who are not so big on the tech, but need a little bit of extra boost in their remembering. The big thing, though, that I tend to recommend is putting to-do list items into your schedule. And the reason is this: stuff on a to-do list can just sort of sit there forever because it becomes a thing where it's like, well, is now the time to do that? I don't know, maybe. Well, how about now? Is now the time? Or is now the time I should do, wait, do I do this thing on my to-do list or do that or that or that or that? So it's hard to know. So instead, what I recommend is that you take items off of your to-do list, time non-specific tasks, and instead you make them time specific. So you say, okay, Tuesday afternoon after lunch, I'm going to do these things. Ding, 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 scribble into your calendar. Or, on Wednesday morning, research for whatever. So you don't necessarily have to write down exactly what gets done, but it's stuff related to researching, I don't know, summer vacations, right? Or need to call the bank, but I got to call them before 3. So you put that in your schedule somewhere before 2:45. So taking those items and sticking them into your calendar. Yes, you're not going to want to do it all the time. And yes, it's a bit of a pain at times. But what it does is it makes it much more likely that it's actually going to happen. You're not writing in pen, hopefully, right? If something comes up, you can move it around, but at least it's a place to start. It might also help you if you're the type of person who tends to overcommit. You get to see your schedule fill up. So kind of like those analog clock hands, right? You get to see them moving. As your schedule fills up, it makes it much easier to say, ooh, you know what? Sorry, I can't do that thing on Tuesday. Totally jammed. What about Wednesday or Thursday? The trick here is, obviously, once you scribble it in, you actually got to do it. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that at the end here. But at least you've got it there as the awareness. Like, I am aware this is a thing I had planned to do. I understand why it is it would be good for me to do it. Now I got to push myself to do it, right? But again, motivation doesn't mean anything if you don't have the awareness to begin with. Now, the problem, of course, is how long do you know, like if you're planning out stuff in your schedule, how long do you know, how much time should you put down for it? Is this a 10-minute task? Is this an hour? Well, it sort of depends. And, when the question comes up in session with clients of like, how long does something take? There's actually a bunch of different answers to that question, right? Because especially if we're talking about like kids with ADHD doing homework, there's the actual time spent actually working, right? Which if we were talking about, let's say, a 6th grader in math homework, that could be 15 minutes, right? 15 minutes of actually doing math. Then there's the question of how much time do you need to find all this stuff that you need or the information, right? And the more disorganized you are, the longer it's going to take. So before we can do the 15 minutes of math homework, we need to spend another 15 minutes, screwing around on the website, clicking here, clicking there, going over to YouTube, even though that's not really related to math, but somehow we wound up there anyway. We need to come back and say, oh, wait, here's where the teacher put the homework, right? So all of a sudden that 15 minutes could be a whole lot more than 15. There's also the time spent taking breaks, getting distracted, managing interruptions, whatever. So, for some folks with ADHD, tasks expand to fill the time available. If you have 15 minutes to do it, it'll take you 15. If you have 3 hours, it'll take you 3 hours. Somehow 15 minutes expands to become 3 hours. In general, the longer a task takes, the more likely that you need to add in extra time. You need to pad your estimates a little bit. So that was some ideas on how to see time so that you can sort of plan it a little bit more effectively. Now let's talk about the other half of it, because it's not just about having a good calendar or to-do list. It's also about actually like doing this stuff, and not at the last minute or after the last minute, but doing it early enough that it hopefully doesn't become this stress-filled, chaotic scramble. So let's talk about how to feel the future more, so that you can maximize your motivation, actually do the stuff that you should do when it would be a good time to do it. Now, the problem with life is that we have lots of different competing goals, right? Some stuff is really interesting. Some stuff is really boring and annoying, but it's hard to know. So like when I finish this recording, what should I do? Should I work out? Like, because that's clearly good for me. Or do I hang out with my son and see what he's doing, right? Because certainly I want to be a good parent, so that's important. Then again, I got some billing to do, which is really kind of annoying and whatever, but that's pretty important too, because it's nice to get paid at the end of the month. And actually, I wonder, it's pretty fuzzy around here. I should probably do some vacuuming. Like that would be helpful to do. And then actually come to think of it, there's a bunch of weeding. Like that's also, that would be good to do, I guess, or it would be good to have it done. I don't feel like doing it. So like of all these things, like what do I do? Right. So like you need to pick in every moment because I can't do 3 or 4 of those things at once. The challenge then is that lots of stuff in life has long delays between action and consequence. So as much as I'm all in favor of natural consequences for some things, like, you throw your towel on the floor, you have a wet, cold, gross towel tomorrow, fine, that works because short time between action and consequence, and nobody dies of wet towels, right? Big deal. But lots of other things like late tax returns, if you think about doing your taxes by April 15th of 2020 actually begins with January 1st of 2019, right? Like that you should be saving receipts from January 1st that will not come into action until 15 months later, right? 15 months from now, when you're doing your taxes, that is when it should have, when you will either be glad at yourself or curse yourself for having put that receipt in the right place. So on April, let's be honest, 14th, you can actually find it and know what it is and add it in and then get a tax deduction for it. Or if you eat a bunch of garbage today, you probably don't die of a heart attack today from eating garbage, right? You die of a heart attack years from now. Or if you're, not doing your homework, the ultimate natural consequence of not doing your homework is you don't get into the college that you want. But if you're a 6th grader who doesn't do his homework today, it is 6 years from now before you feel that natural consequence, right? Because it affects the classes you get into in 7th grade, which affect the classes you get into in 8th grade, which then affect the classes in 9th, and then the grades you get there, and then that affects your college, right? So there's lots of things in life that have way too big a delay between action and consequence. So that thing of like feeling it in the moment, like you don't feel it until it's too late. And this is my unofficial slogan of ADHD time management. More so than for everybody else, folks with ADHD really, by the time you feel it, it's too late. So when it's Thursday night and you've got 6 hours worth of paper writing to do, it's too late. Like you can't go back to Wednesday and say, you know what, I think I'm bang out a couple hours now, so tomorrow is not so bad. By the time you're there, it's too late. By the time you realize that you've raced out the door and it's now, you're going to be late to that really important appointment, it's too late. By the time you realize it, you can't go back and change time. Unless you invent a time machine, you're kind of stuck with what you got in that moment. So again, this is true for all of us. Like we all have our moments where we eat too much and then feel bad afterwards. We all have our moments where we stay up too late and then feel draggy tomorrow. Maybe, have an extra drink or two, which feels like an awesome idea when we're doing it. Not such a good idea the next day, right? We all have those moments, but folks with ADHD especially have those moments much bigger and much more often. And the reason is that temporal discounting kills natural consequences. So the further out something is, the less we feel it now. But especially our folks with ADHD, on that first day of the marking period, that grade that they're going to get at the end of the marking period 10 weeks from now, it might as well be a million years from now, right? It's just they don't feel it until they're up against the deadline of like, oh my God, I'm failing 3 classes and now my parents are going crazy. Um, but the thing of it is, in order to feel those future natural consequences, what we need to do is think about past experiences. Think about what was that like? How did I feel in that moment? So last semester or the semester before. And then apply those feelings into the current moment. Here I am at week 1 of the marking period. Don't feel like repeating that again. I remember how terrible I felt at the end of last marking period. I will now make different choices, right? I will now, so as to avoid that terrible feeling in 10 weeks, I'm going to do some things different now. This is much harder for our friends with ADHD because they really feel the present moment, which is, ooh, that's way more exciting than homework. And then they go there rather than doing the boring, annoying, painful homework. And they say, well, I'll just get to it later. So, in order to bring that future consequence more into the present, so that we can then resist the sort of siren song of the present moment, the temptations of the present, the distractions of the moment, we need to really kind of think about what that future is going to be, right? As I say, kind of bring the future into the present. So you don't have to wait to feel it until it's become too late. So the way that we do this, there's 5 different things that we can do here to make those later natural consequences have more of an impact on what we're going to do right now. So one of them is make those consequences much more immediate, right? You don't tell your 15-year-old, if 10 weeks from now you have bad grades at the end of the marking period, boy, are you going to be in trouble then. Because if that 15-year-old has ADHD, they're not going to feel it. It's not going to do anything for 10 weeks or at least 9.5. Or if you're an adult with ADHD, that whole thing of like, boy, am I going to be mad at myself 15 months from now when I can't find this receipt, right? Not helpful. So make the consequences much more immediate. So for example, on a daily basis, you tell your teenager, here's the deal. You can't play video games until the homework is done. Once it's done, then you can play. That is a much more effective thing than saying, boy, are you going to be unhappy in 10 weeks. Make the consequences much more frequent. So, if you have a job that's pretty wide open, you've got these long deadlines and people don't really check until you get to the end, schedule much more frequent progress checks with your boss or your coworkers or teammates or the people you're on the project with. So like, hey, can we just do a quick check-in like every week or a couple times a week? Let's just kind of check in and see where we're at. It's much more effective at keeping you on track than dreading some far off meeting where it turns out that you're, caught empty-handed. You can also make the consequences much more external. Right? So it's not simply internally, I will feel bad about this, but rather externally, I'm going to pay a price. So for example, telling a friend like, look, here's the deal. If I'm more than 15 minutes late, I'm buying dinner. Or if it's 15 minutes, I'm buying you an appetizer. If it's a half hour, then I'm going to buy you dinner. Right? So it's much more external, and that might make it a little bit more motivating. And you can make it silly and you can make it funny and you can make it ridiculous and whatever. If that makes it a little bit more enjoyable and motivating, that's fine too. You can also bring the future into the present by making the consequences much more salient, right? So again, not this vague notion of what might happen, but really sort of something that's going to grab somebody's attention. So for example, if your teenager is too slow getting out of bed, too slow getting going in the morning, and they miss the bus and you got to drive them, make them pay you for it. $5. You owe me $5. If I'm your Uber to school, you're giving me $5. That's the deal. Or I have a colleague who's a psychologist, has a billing program where they can't bill for the sessions until she writes a progress note. So you don't get paid for the session until you write the note. Everybody hates writing the notes. That's a struggle for a lot of folks. That's a pretty good incentive, right? That is a thing that you're going to be motivated to do something about. And finally, idea number 5, bring the future into the present by making those consequences much more consistent. So, like as parents, we're always told the importance of being consistent because, if your kids think they can get away with it sometimes, they're going to roll the dice, right? And you can't really blame them. Like they're looking at the risk reward. It's kind of working out, right? Because too often nothing bad happens. So you might as well go for it. Or another example, if you're using one of those kind of diet tracker apps, whether it's like Weight Watchers or whatever, any of those, it helps you see meal by meal, snack by snack, where you're at with your daily calorie totals, which is much more effective than having this vague notion of like, I think I'm fine. I don't think that cookie was that big, right? I don't think it had that many calories. We're fine here. So when it comes to managing ADHD, or frankly, bringing out the best in any of us, imposing artificial consequences is much more effective than waiting for natural ones. That again, the natural consequences for folks with ADHD, they come too late. By the time you feel it, it's too late. And that is a terrible way to go through life. So a lot of managing ADHD better is, in the case of parenting kids with ADHD, it's about the parents setting things up so the kid with ADHD has an easier time staying on track. When it comes to adults, we need to do that for ourselves, of setting yourself up for success and not putting yourself into situations that require more willpower than you're likely to manage. So in addition to these various strategies of making those consequences kind of stick a little bit better, we can also use this idea of kind of pausing and picturing. And I'm not going to say this is easy, and I'm not going to say it's going to work all the time, because it won't. And none of us are perfect, and none of us are like, monks living a, austere lifestyle. But it is a thing that can sometimes tip the balance often enough to make a little bit of a difference in your life. So if you remember, the problem with temporal discounting is we really feel the present and we don't really feel the future. So we can tip that balance a little bit. We can kind of rebalance, compensate for it by making a conscious effort in that moment to really kind of stop and sort of think about, how am I going to feel in the future? So again, if I've got that big thing due on Friday, here we are on Monday, how am I going to feel on Thursday night when I have to do this? Or if I have to present this thing in the department meeting on Friday morning, how am I going to feel in the meeting? Am I going to feel like, ugh, I did a terrible, like, I don't know what I'm doing here. Like, my slides look like garbage. I don't have the answers. I really hope I don't get called out. So to picture it as vividly as possible. If I don't get going on this now, if I don't do anything here on Monday, how am I going to feel on Thursday night and Friday morning? On the other hand, if I do get going, if I do begin to kind of chip away, how am I going to feel then? So to really think about the present. Do not think about, how do I feel about doing it now? Because the answer is, I don't want to do it now. But here's the thing, you will never want to do it. It's not like on Monday you don't feel like doing it, but boy, on Tuesday is the day now I'm in the mood to do this boring thing I didn't want to do yesterday, right? If you don't want to do it now, you will not want to do it later. So you might as well just bite the bullet and do it now. And to think about, how will Friday morning sitting in the meeting me feel about Monday sitting at my desk me? Like, is Friday me going to be pissed at Monday me? Like, God, I hate that guy. He totally screwed me on this one. If that freaking Monday me had actually done a few things, I'd be in such a better place right now, Friday morning, sitting in the meeting with my boss staring at me, wondering why I don't know the answer, right? So really think about it as vividly as possible and kind of bring that future into the present. So you're more likely in this present moment to actually get going and make a few things happen. At the end of the day, managing ADHD is all about tilting the odds of success. You're not going to be perfect, but you don't have to be perfect. Nobody is perfect. You don't even necessarily actually have to be as good as the person sitting next to you. You just need to be perhaps a little bit better in some of these ways. Folks with ADHD have lots of strengths, lots of skills, lots of awesome qualities. The challenge is, how do you improve some of these specific things, mostly related to time, that trip you up, that get in the way, that make it harder to show the world what it is that you have to offer? Our goal then, when it comes to ADHD management, whether it's medication, therapy, coaching, reading good lists of strategies, whatever, it's about smoothing over some of the rough spots. It's making some of those challenges a little bit less challenging. My hope here is that by understanding that ADHD is really about time, it's not about distraction, it's not about impulsivity, it's about time. Like, that is the thing that ADHD impacts. If you can understand that, hopefully, this presentation has made it a little bit easier to sort of manage time and to think beyond the present moment, to feel beyond the present moment, and to create a future for yourself and the people you care about that lines up a little closer with what you intend it to. So that is my hope. That was my goal. Hopefully I hit it. As a quick plug, in the year 2020, this is going to be on YouTube. You might see it much later, but the big ADHD conference of the year is going to be online due to COVID issues, sponsored by CHAD, ADA, and ACO. If you go to chad.org, you'll be able to, or ADD.org or ADHDcoaches.org. You can then click through and get more information about it. Hopefully in 2021, we're going to be back in person, and every year thereafter in November. So always a good resource. Finally, if you want more information about me, information about my books, including my newest one, ADHD After Dark, as well as recordings of past presentations and other good stuff in the world of ADHD, check out adultadhdbook.com. And thank you again. Hopefully this was useful. If it was, please share it with other people. And, let's increase the impact that good information has on making the lives of people with ADHD a little bit better. Thanks.